So we're here at the Finance Ministry for a frank discussion with Finance Minister Clyde Caruana. Air Malta, let's start with the big one. You recently unveiled a plan to reduce workers by half. How confident are you that this is going to save the airline?
Well, as I said during the press conference, the airline has gone through a number of changes. This is one of many changes. For example, the first one and perhaps the most important one was the reorganization of the network. As the executive chairman said, the airline was losing millions of euros on the network. That has been addressed. Now, of course, we have to look at other things, amongst which, as you've just mentioned, the workforce, where there are another couple of millions that the airline can save over there. And of course, I, together with the chairman and the board, we're doing our utmost in order to make sure that the airline survives.
How many people applied so far for the employee transfer scheme?
Well, as of Wednesday, Thursday, the numbers were in the region of about 150, but I'm expecting the numbers to increase significantly as a result that throughout the past week, we have closed negotiations with all the unions. There were some things that needed to be addressed. Those have been resolved.
What were workers offered? Were they offered a guaranteed job for life until they reach pensionable age?
Well, yes, that was one of the offers, which is similar to what has been offered in the past. Of course, this is not something that the workers brought upon themselves. So it's only fair that the workers do not have to pay up for the consequences. And as I've said during the press conference, the workers will be offered an alternative employment in the public sector. However, as some associations, employers associations have mentioned, they said, listen, could it be that some of them perhaps can be shifted to the private sector if they want to opt that way? And that is something that I'm still considering.
If you had to look at the Air Malta problem, let's call it an Air Malta problem, and you had to look at Air Malta as a patient, what can you diagnose the main reason why Air Malta is in the state that it is today?
Well, I would say that there were many reasons. As I said, network, overstaffing, bad commercial decisions that were taken over the years. So the problems are quite multifaceted. But perhaps one of the major issues was that the airline was run not on commercial basis, but other goals were at the forefront of commerciality.
Was it used as a political tool, for example?
Well, I was quite clear, no, during the press conference. At times it was used as another government department. And of course, you cannot have a commercial entity. What is the difference between Air Malta and the government department? Air Malta is a commercial entity. It has to survive on its own steam. So all the decisions that have been taken throughout the past year and that will be taken in the coming months and years, they have to make commercial sense.
Was there prolonged mismanagement at Air Malta?
Well, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, if it wasn't the case, I wouldn't have had to take such actions now, no.
And is there responsibility that should be shouldered?
Well, I have to look forward. I mean, I can spend endless conversations discussing what went wrong and perhaps what should have been the solution to that in the past, but the here is now. So my ultimate responsibility is that I have to make sure that the airline continues to fly, that there's a future. I'm very confident in that. We're going to do our utmost in order to make sure that that happens. And ultimately, even my message to the workers, the employees who are going to remain with the company, we have to make sure that we get it right. We're taking all the necessary decisions in order to make sure that this happens.
There was a suggestion that Air Malta should give up its national carrier status. and operate flights on behalf of other airlines. What do you think about this idea?
I beg to disagree. If the airline operates on commercial basis, it can make it. But it strictly has to operate along those lines.
Let's switch from planes to hospitals. The Vitals deal. Do you think that the Vitals deal was good value for money?
Well, certainly there are significant problems. Otherwise, we wouldn't be discussing this issue now.
How much would the taxpayer have saved had the hospitals not been privatized?
Well, I would look at it the other way around, in the sense that the deal is not working because it doesn't make enough sense to make it viable, for its end goals. That is, for any business venture to work out, to make it flourish, you have to have profit. It's very clear that the way all this works out isn't generating enough revenue for them to make it viable.
Stewart said this week that the deal is worthless for them because it's not. And at the same time, the government wants to get its hospitals back. So why not just part ways?
Well, at times life it's not that straightforward, no? There are a good number of legal implications. I'm not a legal expert myself, so I'm not going to try to venture in that area. But from what I can understand is that there are a good number of legal issues that need to be ironed out before something like that can happen.
Is the government ready to fork out more money to rescind this contract?
Well, there are many issues, and I'm not going to enter into the merit of these issues for the simple reason that it's not just one problem, but there are many problems that need to be tackled. It's not just the money. So of course, unless they are tackled in a very holistic manner, it would be a bit frivolous to try to just water down all the discussion to money.
Let's talk about money though. What would we have done with the money that the government paid to Vitals and then to Stewart for the hospitals that didn't work out?
Well, if we look at the money, where is the money going? Most of the money is going to pay for employees. So let's say that the deal wasn't there from the first day. Most of the money would still have been forked out to pay for the wages and salaries. So I wouldn't portray the issue as if this is something that just revolves around money. It's more about the capital aspect of the project rather than the running expenditure.
The deficit stands at 1.6 billion. And does this worry you?
No, and I'll tell you why. Last year, the target that I've announced in the budget for 2021 was set at 11%, 11.1, something like that. The deficit is going to be lower than the 11%. So that gives us a good indication that the economy is still running strong, tax revenue is coming in, and that gives me peace of mind that the deficit, of course, eventually will come in check.
Do you have a timeline by when we will have the surplus that we had before this?
Well, the targets that we have, and I'm very adamant that we stick to them, is that by 2024, we go below the 3% limit set by the Maastricht criteria. So that is the first goal that we have to achieve.
All right. Do you plan to increase any taxes?
No.
No. So where will you get the money from?
Well, as I've always said, there are three ways. First, the economy grows, and that will give us more revenue, as I've just pointed out. Second, we have to make sure that what government spends, it's spent correctly, and I think that we need to do some reviews. So of course there can be some savings. We can still deliver what we are delivering, but be more cost efficient. Third, and this is something that I have every now and then mentioned in my speeches is that we have to make sure that government collects all its dues. So I'm quite sure that together with economic growth, looking at government expenditure and making sure that revenue comes in, I'm very confident that we can keep the deficit in check and eventually move towards a balanced budget.
On this last point, you recently launched what's being described as an attack on those who don't pay their taxes. The government is owed 5 billion now in tax arrears. What would you consider as a success in terms of tax collection?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say it is an attack. It is an appeal whereby I'm stating the obvious. I mean, taxes, it is a civic duty to pay taxes. Throughout the pandemic, everyone expected government to fork out money in order to help the business community, in order to save jobs. That is what the obvious thing to do, and that is what we have done. But ultimately, at the end of the day, money does not come for free, and it neither grows on trees. So it has to come from somewhere. There needs to be an overhaul of the tax department, the Inland Revenue, the way how it operates. It has to have, of course, all the necessary resources that are required in today's economy, and that is where we are going.
You spoke about a culture change, that everyone who owes tax pays it. How do you intend, though, cracking down on defaulters?
Well, most probably over time, even if I don't do anything, that is, even through the narration itself, many people will start to align themselves. So even by just saying, listen, guys, we have to make sure that what is owed to government is paid. And at a point in time, the tax department had a good number of individuals coming forward, regularizing themselves. The windfall of revenue that we had is not just the result of economic growth. People are regularizing themselves.
Does the government intend to continue exchanging their assets for money that they owe to the government?
Well, rather, in a way, it is a very simply put statement, what he said.
Yes.
We do not exchange. The legal notice was about, if you owe money to government, but you are asset rich, you can dispose of that asset. If the asset comes in government coffers, that is, you make up for your taxes with that money, okay? The legal notice was about the tax due on that property, no, that is not paid, but just that. All the tax dues that have been accumulated, interest, penalties, etc., those have to be paid.
Do you agree with the proposal that tax defaulters should be automatically excluded from public procurement?
If there are no agreements in place, that is, if they have no agreements of how they're going to pay up for the taxes, yes. Why? Because otherwise we would allow, in a legal way, unfair competition. Why? Because someone who is paying his taxes would unfairly compete with someone who's not paying his taxes. Because whoever is not paying his taxes can lower his unit cost. No?
Let's talk about tax dues and setting examples. The Labour Party and the Nationalist Party, both of them, owe €5 million together in unpaid VAT, mostly as a result of their media organizations. Is this not a bad example for people?
Of course it is. I mean, and that is why at times, both political parties are criticized. Of course, both political parties throughout the past months have, and of course are in the process of trying to settle those dues.
Once we're talking about money, the IIP is a big revenue generator, and the country has problems with other European member states and even the European Commission about this golden passport visa. Can the country live without the IIP?
Yes. I mean, the sustainability of public finance does not depend on that program. It's something that helps, I cannot ignore that, but it's not that, the fiscal sustainability of the country depends solely on that, far from it.
Grey listing, you've been on the record saying that we'll be out of it you're optimistic that we'll be out of it by this year. Has the government spoken to FATF recently?
Well, what has happened throughout the past week is that we have submitted all that has happened in terms of work between June and December. Now that needs to be evaluated by the board, and then after that evaluation, the board will decide whether it makes sense to pay a visit to Malta in order to sort of double check what has been reported, so that from then onwards they can make up their mind of whether we should go out or stay over there. A lot of work has been done, and we think that with the progress that has been registered over the months, they should be pleased.
Does the government have a backup plan just in case its plan to get out of grey listing doesn't work?
We have to make it work.
But is there a backup plan?
What
if it doesn't? What is the worst case scenario?
No, what we are doing is that we have to make sure that Malta comes out of this process ASAP.
All right.
And we're doing that.
What if it doesn't happen?
It has to happen. It has to happen. And it has to happen because, as I said, the progress that we're doing, and of course there is communication and feedback, we're quite confident that in the areas where we failed, and I have to mention again that they were 2 areas, we're registering quite positive progress.
So you're still very confident that it's going to happen?
We're doing our utmost. In the coming weeks and months, we would have certain feedback for sure.
You mentioned last week a plan, a new mechanism to help the poor.
Yes.
What, first of all, have you submitted this plan to MCSD?
So what happened is...
what does this plan have?
Yes. So what happened is that throughout the past week, on Tuesday, I've organized a meeting for the social partners who represent the interest of workers. So the employers so far were not invited. Together with them, there were also organizations who have interest in the social aspects, such as Caritas and the Alliance Against Poverty. So the idea of having an additional mechanism, and I have to stress this, an additional mechanism to what we have right now. The purpose of this mechanism would be that of having a mechanism which addresses spikes in inflation, and that help is purely focused on those who are really in need. Pensioners, people on low income, and that is what I am discussing with the organizations that I've mentioned, so that ultimately we would have an additional mechanism which compensates the people who are mostly hardly hit.
Is there a timeline for this?
Something like this would be concluded this year, so that it is part of this year's budget.
Exactly. Unemployment. So unemployment is on the low side, right? But employers still complain that they can't find people, especially in certain sectors. Yes. Do you think we should revisit that plan of importing workers? Should we start it again, for example?
So it's not something that stopped. Primarily stopped as a result of the pandemic. Malta is the only economy in Europe where, in terms of numbers, the demand for labor did not contract at all throughout the pandemic. Not across all sectors. There were some contractions in hospitality, but by and large, as an aggregate, the numbers still kept on increasing month after month. What happened actually was that the people who were in the shadow economy were regularized, because otherwise they wouldn't have benefited from the wage supplement. So throughout the pandemic, we've seen that there were registrations of people who were working in the shadow economy, and as a result of that, the economy became more regularized. Now, the economy is still growing. We're expecting the economy to keep on growing throughout the coming years as well. And therefore, as a result of that, the demand for labor will continue to increase.
Let's talk about you now. You're not a politician. You never contested an election, and
But I will do in the coming one.
the next one is going to be your first one. Do you think unpopular stances that you took on tax and on Air Malta is going to damage your electability?
No. Whatever I say, I strongly believe in. I will keep on saying things that I strongly believe in, and I think that frankness is something I think that the electorate appreciates.
How much of your soul are you ready to sell to get re-elected?
0%. I'm doing whatever I can do in my capabilities to do the best out of this job. If people, of course, are happy with that, they will vote for me. Others perhaps will choose other candidates, and they're free to do so, but ultimately so be it. I will do whatever I can do for the job, but that's it.
What do you think of, linked to this, what do you think of Oliver Scicluna's comments on clientelism in politics?
Well, I think he was discussing about something that is quite endemic to this country. No?
How can it be stopped?
Well, again, it's a culture change, no? It's a culture change. The culture change that this country needs in a good number of areas, the list is quite substantial. I mean, you cannot at the same time expect that things change overnight from this to that.
Is Labour going to win the next election?
Hopefully, yes.
And why?
Because I think that we are committed to do what is right. The energy, the dedication, and I mean, what we really believe in, that is social justice, we have provided enough evidence about all this throughout the past 2 years, throughout the pandemic. True, mistakes were done. People, of course, took note of all this. No one is perfect, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I still strongly believe that the best choice for this country for the coming years, in order to make sure that the economy continues to grow and in order to make sure that social justice continues to prevail, is still Labour.
What were the biggest mistakes? You mentioned mistakes were done.
I mean, enough was said about them. People have read a lot about what has happened throughout the past years. There's no need for me to outline.
Mention some examples, for example.
There's no need for me to outline about all this, anything about this. I mean, everyone lives in this country, has lived in this country, and everyone knows what has happened. What we really need to do is that we have to look forward and we have to make sure that the challenges that we have ahead of us, we have to address them. And as I said, I repeat, I strongly believe that Labour is the party in government that can address these challenges and make sure that people at the end of the day have the peace of mind that this country will continue to provide a decent standard of living.
Thank you, Minister, for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.